So I'm Saddharaja. Most of you will have met me before. So we're going to look at week 2, why have ethical precepts. So I've got a load of little stuff prepared for you here. So I'm going to spend my time working my way through that. But also shortly that I get you to do some work in groups as well. Have a bit of a chat with each other in groups about well, ethical precepts, actually. So let's have a look. So, can everybody hear me okay online? You getting a good response there? Good, thumbs up, that's what we want, thumbs up, good, okay. All right, so last week, Amrachandra was here and she introduced her theme, Mind Creates World. So we were talking about how in our minds, we actually create the world that we live in. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a minute. But you started off talking about the fundamental insight of the Buddha. The Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, he had this insight into reality, that everything is dependent upon conditions. Yeah. So things arise in dependence on conditions. And also in the ceasing of those conditions, things cease. This was the Buddha's fundamental teaching. So whether it's a little flower that you pick, or whether it's a massive galaxy in the universe, everything arises in dependence upon conditions and ceases. And this is quite important because it applies to everything that's going on in the world. And it also applies to our spiritual lives. It allows us to have a spiritual life. It means that we can make efforts and we can grow and develop spiritually as a result. So we call this teaching conditionality. It's got lots of different terms. Sometimes we call it conditioned co-production. That's quite a big mouthful, isn't it? Conditioned co-production. Got a Sanskrit term for it as well, but I won't bore you with that. But that's the background to us understanding karma, this word karma, which we'll be going into in a minute. Karma, by the way, means willed action. A lot of people seem to think it means fate or destiny or something like that, but it doesn't actually. It means willed action. So let's have a look at that. So karma is part of a system of 5 different modes of conditionality. And we need to understand this a bit if we're going to understand why we have an ethical system in Buddhism. So, got a little sheet for you here. I hope you can see that online, all that. So you can see all the different modes of conditionality. This is what Amrachandra was referring to last week. So we've got the laws of physics and chemistry. So we can't really change those. They're just there. We don't really have a big influence on that. There's also conditionality is applied to the laws of biology. So plants and sunshine and rain and things grow. Stuff happens in that regard. And then there's the laws of lower psychology, which is kind of simple mental processes, a bit like, you know, penguins seem to be able to find their way through snowstorms, don't they, to where their nest is and things like that. But it can apply to sort of basic human psychology, even like PTSD or trauma. Recently, I fell off my bike in the Highlands of Scotland, hit my head and broke my wrist. And so I had a bit of trauma, you know, as a result of that. I couldn't do anything about it. It's just was going to happen. And then it passed. And then we've got this one, which is really important, the law of karma. And so that's conditionality applied to action and its effect. So that's a really, really important one because we've got a lot of agency in that area. How we act ethically really matters. And finally, we've got this other one, which is the Dharma Niyama, which is conditionality applied to spiritual life and spiritual practice and those activities which lead to enlightenment. So that's a bit of background really around this whole area of having an ethical system. So yeah, So these are the 5 ways. They're called niyamas or regularities. There's something you can depend on in your life. So karma isn't fate or destiny. It's willed action of body, speech, and mind. So according to Buddhism, body, speech, and mind is all of you. That's your physical body and what you do with it. There's your speech, what you write and what you say. And there's your mind. There's all the actions associated with your mind. So mind is an action within Buddhism. So with our minds, we create the world. So the kind of life that you've individually got, and my life, have come about largely as a result of your mind and your actions coming from there on. We can't control everything in our lives, but largely our lives have come about as the way that we view our world and see our world. We create the world. So you're here at the Buddhist Center listening to me because you had a thought about that you were attracted to doing that at some point in the past. So that's what's happened. In my case, I was a teenager and I had a thought about going to a Buddhist Center when I was a teenager. And that's why I'm here. So it's not random what happens to us. We have agency over what we're doing. And Buddhism sees this as a completely natural system. Yet there's no kind of authority somewhere that's controlling it all. It's just the way things actually really are. So when I got involved in Buddhism when I was a teenager, and I came across this teaching, I was really excited. I was really excited. I thought, oh yeah, I can live the kind of life I want. I can create the kind of world, kind of life I want for myself. So that felt like there's a lot of freedom around all that. However, I did feel very free. It did occur to me later on that actually it's quite a big responsibility because you have to take responsibility for your life and how you live it and what happens. And also in relation to other people around you. You have to take responsibility for all that. You can't look to some higher authority to make things happen for you. So it's up to you. So it's quite sobering, that. It's interesting, when I realized that, I also realized that nothing in my formal education or my religious education had ever taught me that at all within my life. It's a completely new realization that I got from practicing Buddhism. All right, well, I'll carry on a bit and yeah, let's see how that goes. So let's go back to the question, why have ethical precepts? And I think the most direct way I want to answer that is to say, well, we've got a system here in Buddhism which works. It's a really good system. It's tried and tested over thousands of years. That doesn't necessarily mean it's good. So it's something for you to try out for yourself. You can try the system and see whether you think it works. And if you do, it's something that you can build on for the rest of your life. So the 5 precepts is a way, 5 ethical precepts that a Buddha would naturally act. So if you're an enlightened person, that's just naturally how you behave under all circumstances. And with these 5 precepts, there's no rules, there's no commandments from on high. They're just drawn from the wisdom and the compassion of the Buddha and his life. So they're training principles which could help you on the path to enlightenment. It's as simple as that. They're an essential part of the path to enlightenment, as essential as meditation. They're also a skill that you can learn. It's something that you have to constantly work on in your life. So take mindfulness, for instance. We never get to a point where mindfulness ends and, oh yes, I've got that one now. It's always something that you're working on all the time. So the precepts are our best attempt, really, at communicating the principles of an ethical system that we have. And, well, the main thing about the precepts to remember is it's not about being good. It's not about being good. So the course is based on this book by It's about dramatic. It's called Not About Being Good. People often say, well, what does that really mean? What it means is not being a goody-goody. Yeah, everybody knows what a goody-goody is. Goody-goody is somebody who's worked out what the ethical system is, the ideal norms of society, in a particular society, yeah, and just conforms to them. And probably, or appears to conform to them. And takes pleasure in noticing when other people are not conforming to them or appearing to not conform to them. And you probably all met these people. They're often in religious circles. And probably these kind of people, I've certainly met plenty in my life, and probably these people are unthinking conformists. They just like to conform to what society has laid out for them without thinking about it very much. And they might be more concerned about their personal image than about actually practicing an ethical system. So you'll come across this. Hopefully you won't come across it in Buddhism, but I have actually come across it in Buddhism, particularly in my work in India. So they're not, the precepts are not about just being good in that goody-goody kind of way. But also on the other extreme, they're also not about being rebellious, being an ethical rebel. An ethical rebel is someone who once again has worked out what the norm is in society and rebels against it, just as a sort of knee-jerk kind of reaction. They just rebel. And it happened to me when the first lockdown, I kind of noticed myself rebelling. In the first lockdown, you know, Boris Johnson was there on the TV laying out, I want you all to stay at home. I want you to not do this. I'm not going. And straight away I was going, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'll do what I want. You know, I'm not going to do what he says. Straight away there was a kind of knee jerk, and I had to kind of grow up a bit and realise, hang on, this is really serious. I've got to conform, and there's a reason for these. So that's what can happen when you're a rebel. There's a very famous 1950s film called The Wild Ones, where Marlon Brando is called Johnny, and he's the leader of a motorcycle gang that terrorized this small town in America, right, with all these Hells Angels riding around and playing jazz music all the time. Everybody's terrified of them. And in one scene, they're having a jazz party and people are dancing. But one of the girls says to Marlon Brando, to Johnny, she said, what is it that you're rebelling against? And he says, what have you got? So in other words, anything will do. Whatever the norms are, I'll rebel against them. It's a great scene. You can watch it on YouTube. It's one of the iconic scenes. He does it with sort of snarl, you know, Marlon Brando. So that's the rebel, really. That's where you haven't really evaluated things in any real depth. You haven't really looked at them. You've just sort of, oh, I'll just rebel against it. And it's quite superficial, really. And also, if you're a rebel, you're still very dependent on the group, because they're providing the norms for you to rebel against and identify yourself against, you know. So you're still caught up in the group, really. You're not being an individual. So yeah, let's not be a rebel. Let's not be a goody-goody. It's interesting that when people come across the precepts, when you come across a list of precepts, you might kind of go into one camp or the other immediately. If you've not come across them, you might immediately want to kind of conform to them and take them on. We might immediately kind of rebel against them, like I did with the lockdown rules. So another reason for having an ethical system is our relationship with other beings. Oh, by the way, I want to show you the precepts. I'm not going to go into them in a lot of detail because Kula is going to do that a little bit later. Oh, look, yeah, here's a little bit of an overview of what I've just been saying. So it's 5 precepts. Have a body, speech, and mind. It's about avoiding unskillful action, developing and practicing skillful actions. They're training principles, they're not rules. And the precepts are how a Buddha would behave. And intention matters in Buddhist ethics. I think last week Amrachandra used the example of a cup of tea. You know, if you unmindfully end up spilling your tea on somebody, well, that's not very good, but it's not that bad either, is it? Because you didn't intend to do it. But if you deliberately went out and threw a cup of tea over somebody, that's really quite a serious matter. So intention is really quite important. All right, yeah, let's look at the precepts. So just notice what your reaction is when you see them. So there's the 5 precepts. So you'll see there's 2 parts to them. There's the bit that you're moving away from, and there's the bits that you're moving towards. So I'll just let you have a quick look at those and take them in, and then I'll talk a bit more. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about the first precept. Good. Has everybody read them? Good. Is there any rebels here? Has anybody rebelled against them? Yeah? Killer prayer, have you been rebelling? What about conformists? Have we got a few conformists going on? Okay. So yes, another reason for having a system of ethical principles and precepts is our relationship with other people, our relationship with human beings and with non-human beings. Yeah, so there's this whole big wide world out there with millions and billions of people, and well, we can affect other people. We will affect other people through our actions, and that can be to their benefit, or that can be to their cost. And it's interesting that within Buddhism, the other non-human beings are not just animals. It could also be nature as well. You might even see it in terms of the whole planet, because there are some people who actually view the planet as a living thing. And that's a very, very important topic at the moment in terms of humanity's future. But yeah, particularly most of us need to start just in relation to other people around us. So we can profoundly affect others by how we behave within body, speech and mind. So acting kindly, acting generously, acting with contentment, speaking truthfully and acting mindfully, that's really what the precepts are. They're universally appreciated across the world. They really are. All cultures appreciate those 5 things. You can dress them up and call them the precepts, and that's what we're doing. But actually, it's really about these 5 things: kindness, generosity, contentment, truthfulness, and mindfulness. It's a wonderful thing. So you don't have to tell people that you're a Buddhist, but people notice that stuff in your behavior and appreciate it. I used to work in a mental hospital before I retired and didn't tell anybody I was a Buddhist, but people noticed the way I behaved. Well, one of the things, I didn't swear, for instance, which is very unusual in a mental hospital, I can tell you. And people just noticed that and thought, why are you not doing that? So yeah, you do have an effect upon people through your behavior. The other interesting thing is when you behave skillfully, your conscience is clear. You have a good conscience and you feel quite light and happy with yourself and your life. And that's a very, very good basis for meditation. That really helps meditation. If you're behaving unskillfully and you're not happy with yourself, that can create a lot of turbulence in meditation. It really does affect things. Because when you meditate, you become more ethically sensitive. So meditation and ethics really affect each other. They're interconnected in that regard. And Buddhism tells us the only way we can truly be happy as individuals is if we're interconnected with other people. We care about other people as well as just ourselves. So we're talking about non-selfishness here. And unfortunately, the modern world, is the me generation. It's very, very focused on the individual. And it creates a lot of unhappiness in the world. People are becoming more and more unhappy. And that's because they're not interconnected with other people and caring for other people in that way. So we're going to have a look at the first precept now. And I've got it all here. So I'll read it out for you. I undertake to abstain from taking life. With deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body. And there's the kind of Sanskrit original, which we still chant, by the way, because it's a kind of international Buddhist language. Yeah. Sometimes it's rendered as I undertake to abstain from harming living beings. That's just another kind of translation of it, but you get the drift. It's not just about not killing things, but still doing terrible things to other people. It's not like that. It's actually about a whole avoidance of harming people. So let's have a look at that. So this first precept, you could say, it underlies all the other 4 precepts. There's a principle there of love, of metta, of well-wishing towards others that underlies the other precepts that we'll go into as well. So being totally human means to act with kindness towards other people, to respect other people, and to feel some kind of solidarity with other human beings at the very least. But that, of course, does extend out to the animal kingdom as well. It could seem like quite a high ideal. It could seem like, oh, this is really difficult. People are so difficult in my life, and that's just my family, How am I ever going to kind of extend it out to the rest of the world? Well, believe you me, it's possible. I teach to people in India, thousands and thousands of people in India, and I feel that connection with people when I'm out there. I feel that connection with everyone that comes to the Buddhist center. I feel the connection with people in the street. It's something you can train yourself in as the years go by. So the first precept means moving away from harming living beings and moving towards respect and this essential Buddhist word, metta. Yeah, and for a lot of us, this might mean changes to your lifestyle. It might really affect your lifestyle. And people do this in different ways. A lot of Buddhists become vegetarians and even vegans. And for a lot of people, it will mean they no longer want to be involved in warfare or fighting in wars. There's certain jobs that they won't do anymore because it compromises this precept too much. It happened to me about 40 odd years ago. I was working as a graphic designer, big company at the time, and I ended up having to design a lot of packaging for weapon systems that were being sent out to Africa. I just thought, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I gave up graphic design completely and retrained to do something else, because there's always the possibility that I have to design things which I didn't agree with. It compromised the precepts too much for me. There's lots and lots of stories about how people have changed. But it's up to you how you do that and what you feel is appropriate in your life. So killing is the most extreme form of violence. I think everybody knows that, killing things. But it's worth having a look at what violence really means, because we tend to think of violence as being a physical thing. Well, I've got a little definition here from Saddharaja, who's the founder of this Buddhist movement. Doing to another person, by whatever means, what she or he does not want us to do to them. I'll read it again. Doing to another person, by whatever means, or what she or he does not want us to do to them. So it's quite a broad range, isn't it? It's quite a broad definition of what that can be. Because as I say, we tend to think of violence as being a physical thing, but actually there can be all sorts of ways that violence comes to us. And these days, increasingly, it comes to us via social media. There's violence what people are getting sent to them in social media, sadly. Quite a few of you know I've been on a series of long bike rides to raise money, raise 75,000 quid for a Buddhist centre in Calcutta, India. I've been cycling from Land's End to John O'Groats in Scotland. And last year when I was cycling the kind of southern bit, I was on this road at Devon. Quite a wide road, loads of room for cars and stuff. There I was cycling in the heat. A car came incredibly close to me like this, so close that it was touching me. And it had a group of young men and young women in the car, all jammed in the car. And they just thought it was great fun to come in really close to me like this as I was cycling along. And then they started throwing the obscenities at me. And finally, they got a bottle of, I think it was Coke or some other soft drink, and doused me with this sort of Coke, you know. And anyway, so I ignored them and carried on. Eventually, they sped off. Anyway, we got a couple of miles down the road, there was roadworks. And there they were, stuck in this long line of traffic. So I came alongside them, and their window was open, and they saw me. And they looked really frightened. They looked really frightened. They thought, oh, revenge, we're going to get our comeuppance here. But I didn't, you know, I just cycled past, left it, didn't say anything at all. Of course I wouldn't. Because when you dish out violence to other people, you also not only harm other people, but you bring yourself down as well when you dish out violence to people. So I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to do the same sort of thing they've done to me. Why they did it, I don't know, just for kicks probably. So yeah, when you hurt others, you bring yourself down, don't you, in some form. You've lost your imagination, your identification with other human beings. You've lost your awareness. To some extent, you've lost your humanity a bit, really. So Bhante Sangharakshita, our teacher, coined a term for practicing the first precept. And this is what he said. He calls it moving from the power mode to the love mode. Moving from the power mode to the love mode. So the power mode, we all know what this means, the power mode. It means it's how so much of the world works. We're talking about violence, threats, intimidation, force, manipulation, and litigation. Yeah. And it does seem to get results quite quickly in the world, doesn't it? It seems to kind of make things happen in the world. Unfortunately, those results are invariably unskillful, have unskillful consequences. They tend to perpetuate hatred and a cycle of violence that goes on and on and on. I was in a cafe recently when I was cycling, and I was sat there having a cup of tea. I could hear some guys at the next table. And there was a TV on, and there was a well-known oligarch on the TV, a picture of him. And one of the guys said, what that guy needs is a bullet between his eyes. That will solve all this. I heard him say that. And I thought, you know, it wouldn't. That wouldn't solve anything. It would just perpetuate the cycle of violence. It would just go on and on and on, wouldn't it? But, you know, the power mode is quite tempting, I think, because it seems to get quick results. Whereas the love mode is a lot more imaginative, requires a lot of skill and creativity, but it brings lasting and deeper satisfactory results for yourself and the world. It brings a real result when you're able to switch to the love mode. But you do need to see things, you know, in a creative way. You need to develop the skill in order to do that. And that means imaginatively being able to connect with someone else's point of view, even if their point of view is really unpleasant and not what you like. You need to be able to see things from their point of view, because we don't know what's really behind somebody's views which we might not like. Even Russian oligarchs have got their vulnerability and their trauma in their lives. Everyone's got stuff that they're working with. So making the switch to the love mode, it all hinges on training. We need to train ourselves as the years go by. To feel warmth and love towards others, we need to be aware of them. We need to really see them and see their vulnerabilities. It's not easy to do. But that's the work that we're doing through this precept and through practices like the metta-bhavana meditation, which Kodapriya will be leading us through after the tea break. So it's not enough just to be cheerful and be positive towards people. You've actually got to imaginatively understand their lives and what they are. So I've got a really good little quote here from the romantic poet Shelley, where he really, really sums up the first precept. Here we go. The great secret of morals is love, or a going out of our own true nature, and an identification of ourselves with the beautiful, which exists in thought, action, or person, not our own. A man, to be greatly good, must imagine intensely and comprehensively. He must put himself in the place of another and many others. The pains and pleasures of his species must become his own. The great instrument of moral good is the imagination. So I think Shelley summed it up, the first precept, very well. We need to imaginatively connect with others, which doesn't mean that we have to agree with them, but we imaginatively connect with their lives and see they're a human being with their likes and dislikes, their concerns, just like you have in this world. And this reduces the polarization that so easily goes on between people and brings a deeper connection. So I was brought up in the countryside in the Lake District, Windermere, and I'm from an agricultural background. So I grew up amongst blood sports, shooting, fishing, hunting, all those sort of things, which I never engaged with. But when I meet people who enjoy doing those things, I can understand it. It's a countryside thing. I don't agree with it, but I can talk to people. And I'll do that. So I'll talk to people who are out shooting birds or whatever it is, or rabbits, and I'll talk to them. Because I can understand that world, but I don't agree with it. So I'm not going to polarize with them, but there's some imaginative understanding. Of course, all this isn't easy at all. It's not easy, is it? It's so easy to sort of polarize from people. Say, well, I'm not going to talk to somebody like that. Yeah. Sometimes it's quite hard to make the connection. And this is where the skill comes in. Yeah. Rome wasn't built in a day. We need to see a long-term practice here in this regard. The metta-bhavana meditation is a fantastic way of doing this. It's such an effective practice because you're starting off with yourself and you need to feel love for yourself, metta and appreciation for yourself. You really do. Even if you can't feel very much of that, you'll be able to feel something and you can work with what and grow that little something that you feel. But then you're extending that out to someone close to you, a friend or a family member, a good friend, and you're extending that out. And then you're extending it out, because that's as far as a lot of people go with their care. But then extending it out to someone you don't know, the neutral person, and then even somebody who you find a bit challenging. It's a great practice. And then, of course, equalizing that metta and sending it out into the world. It's quite a transformative practice. So in this way, we strengthen and develop our friendliness, our metta, our empathy for people, for more and more people, human and non-human. So it'll affect our everyday relations with people. It really will. When I was working on a mental health ward, I had a boss who had a habit of screaming 4-letter words at staff when things weren't going very well. So this happened to me quite often. So one day I went to her, I said, when you do that, it means that we lose our respect for you. Are you happy about that? And she really saw it. She really changed. It really affected her. So she changed. I did it in a nice way, you know, but it really made a difference. She hadn't really seen that there was any other way of doing it and getting the job done, you know. So it's a skill that we can learn. learning to be helpful and friendly to people instead of just being right all the time. We're so concerned about being right, aren't we? But actually, it's a lot better to be friendly and helpful to people. The Buddha was very skilled in this regard, and there's very many examples in the scriptures of where the Buddha was incredibly skilled. You know, with the serial killer, Angulimala, where he went into the forest and met the serial killer that everybody was so scared of, the guy that had the necklace of fingers around him. And he got through to the serial killer and got him to stop what he was doing. And when he came out of the jungle, the serial killer following him, you know, as his disciple, people were really shocked. They were scared. He said, "Don't worry." He's had a turnaround, and he became a lifelong disciple of the Buddha. There was the example of Kisa Gotami, the woman who had the dead baby. She was carrying around the dead baby and asking everyone for medicine for her sick baby. People told her, "Look, your baby's dead, that you can't," but she couldn't. Her grief was such that she couldn't take that in. So the Buddha said, "Yeah, I'll cure the baby for you if you bring me some mustard seed from a house where no one has ever died." So she ran off, and of course she was looking and looking, but at every house people said, "Oh no, we've had a death here." Gradually, eventually she came back to the Buddha and said, "Done is the business of the mustard seed." And she'd accepted that her child had died, and she joined the Sangha. So the Buddha was very skilled in his kindness and empathy with people in that regard. And then there was a famous case of the sick monk the Buddha has discovered lying in a hut in his own excrement, his own poo. He was just lying there like this. Poor old guy, sick. The Buddha said, "What's happened to you? Why are you like this?" He said, "Oh, the other monks don't care. You know, I'm not very useful to the Sangha. I'm old and useless." And so the Buddha didn't call. He actually said, "Right, bring me some water. Ananda, come on, we'll clear this guy up. Come on." So the Buddha actually cleaned him up himself, cared for the guy, made him comfortable, fed, put him in a nice place. And then he called the rest of the monks and he said, "Look, you have to look after each other. It doesn't matter what people do, how useful or not, we look after each other. That's what we do in the Sangha." So this can happen, can't it? We can just neglect people because we don't find them useful anymore. But that's not how the Buddha saw things. So the Buddha had great skill, and there's lots and lots and lots of stories of how he displayed that in his life. The Buddha didn't rely on miracles. He wasn't a miracle worker. He just was, he really lived the ethical life, the precepts. So not only that, but the Buddha saw that human beings everywhere were seeking happiness. All individuals were seeking happiness. And so many human beings were seeking it in tragic, unskillful ways. But the Buddha saw that and understood it and wasn't overwhelmed by it, which we often are. So we can take a leaf from the example of the Buddha. We can reflect on human behavior and its delusion. We can reflect on our own delusions in that regard. The next time you don't quite get what you want and you get angry. In my case recently, it was a coffee machine. I put my money in a coffee machine and nothing came out. I got a little bit, I thought, hang on, whoa, come on, get this in perspective, you know. You've lost a quid or whatever it was. But yeah, so we can reflect that human beings, all humans, in some weird way, we're all looking for some kind of happiness in our lives, but probably a lot of the time in the wrong kind of way. So practicing the precepts can be really, really challenging because you're going against the stream of what ordinary society is often doing. Newspapers exist to bring out lots of hate in the world. But the media is there doing that quite a lot of the time, stoking it all up. But practicing the precepts can be really, really liberating. It's a completely creative way of living your life. It's life-changing, actually. So much better than hating people and polarizing or exploiting non-human beings. But it does require intelligence and awareness. And to really apply Buddhist principles to daily life requires quite a lot of intelligence and awareness. And we can't really wait for our motives to become pure before we start acting skillfully. Purity is quite an innocent and creative word within Buddhism. But in the past, in the Western world, purity is often associated with Puritanism, which is not so creative for a lot of people. But in this postmodern world, it simply means not mixed with anything extraneous or dissimilar. So it's a little bit like orange juice. When you buy pure orange juice, it means it's not mixed with chemicals and other additives. And it's a bit like that with us. We've got this ego clinging, we've got mixed motives very often in our behaviors. And gradually over the years, we're kind of purifying ourselves of those things. Selfishness is one of the chief ones. However, and this is my final point before I finish, we can't really wait for our motives to be completely pure before we act skillfully. In fact, we are already acting skillfully in our lives in lots of ways, but we need to see that and we need to build on that through our Dharma lives for the future. We need to get in touch with the spirit and the practice of the first precept. So we can do that right now. And next week, Kula Priya will be exploring the creative mind.